Taylor, and I'm the hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. And Kim Stevens is the clerk for this hearing. This hearing is being recorded, and a sign-in sheet is on the table on the side of the room. So please be sure to sign in for our records, and so that, if necessary, we can contact you in the future regarding the item you're here for. So the hearing is to consider protests filed with respect to the issuance of tentative approvals for the following applications for personal wireless service facility site permits. And this is order number 2016722. So the permits under this order numbers are as follows: 18WR-0098, and this is for GTE Mobile Net of California Limited Partnership, which is also Verizon Wireless, and the address is 2700 Vallejo Street. The second permit number is 18WR-0358, and Modus Inc. This is also AT&T, and the address is 4801 17th Street. The third is 19WR-00108, Mobilite LLC, and the address is 425 Ivan Street. The fourth is 19WR-00123, Mobilite also, and the address is 3010 Sacramento Street. And the fifth is 19WR-00121, XNet Systems, and the address is 2801 Broadway. So my job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make the determination. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the Director. The Director is the one that makes the final determination. When the Director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of them. So if you want to be notified, again, as we said, please sign in. The hearing will proceed as follows. For each of the application permit numbers, I will ask Public Works staff to speak first and present the case. Then I will ask the appellant. Each speaker has 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor time for all speakers. When you hear the first bell, it will mean the speaker has 30 seconds left to speak. A louder second bell will signal that the time is up. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you could submit written testimonies to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask the questions. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. We will now begin the hearing, and I would like to first begin with the order number. Are you presenting all the permits under that same order? Okay. So please, Public Works.
Good morning, my name is Ann Pham, and I will give an overview of the wireless permitting process. The city has limited authority over personal wireless service facilities. Wireless facilities are regulated at the federal level with limited local control, allowing some oversight of design. All authority invested to the city regarding these facilities is restricted to Public Works Code Article 25 and Public Works Order 184504. The process includes review by San Francisco Public Works, the Planning Department, and the Health Department. If all departments recommend approval of the application, the city issues a tentative approval, and the applicant posts and mails this notice to any person owning property or living within 150 feet of the facility. There is a 20-day protest period, and if Public Works receives an objection to this notice, as we have for the applications on today's agenda, Public Works convenes a hearing. We have provided the hearing officer, the Planning Department, and the Health Department with all the objections. Additionally, the applicant has responded to each protest. Public Works Code Article 25, Section 1513H, which I have here, provides all available grounds the city may lawfully use to deny a personal wireless service facility permit. The first ground is if the Health Department incorrectly determined that the application meets Article 25's health compliance standard. This would mean that the facility would not comply with the Federal Communication Commission's emission guidelines. The second ground is if the Planning Department incorrectly determined that the application meets the tier compatibility standards. This would mean that the facility would significantly detract from the defining characteristics of the adjacent neighborhood. The third ground does not apply to today's applications since none of them are proposed adjacent to a city park or open space. The fourth and fifth grounds is if Article 25's requirements for obtaining a wireless permit are not fulfilled or that there's a proposed modification to the design and that modification would not comply with Article 25 standards. For all the applications on today's agenda, we believe the tentative approval was issued correctly. The Health Department found that all applications meet Article 25's health standard, and under federal law, the city cannot deny an application for emission concerns if the city is found to meet FCC guidelines. Additionally, the Planning Department found that all applications meet the tier standards and will not significantly detract from the defining characteristics of the adjacent neighborhoods. Finally, there is no evidence in Public Works possession that demonstrates that these applications will not comply with Article 25 and Order 184504 standards and requirements. We will be here for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. So may I have the appellant speak? Please.
Last one on the list for 2801 Broadway.
So the way this is going to work is the first permit number is 18WR-0098. Do we have anyone? This is 2700 Vallejo Street. Do we have anyone for that? Okay. The second one is 18WR-0358, and this is 4801 17th Street. Is there anyone here for that? Is there any appellant for that? Okay. What about 425 Ivan Street, and this is permit number 19WR-00108? Please come up.
Good morning. My name is Kathy Cohn. I'm here. This is not the first time I'm here about an antenna installation in our neighborhood. First, I want to say San Francisco needs to be an additional kind of sanctuary city. We are a unique city, and we've stood up to governmental positions in the past. We are dealing with untested, unhealthy 5G transmissions now being installed every 2 to 3 blocks in city neighborhoods. The current location at 425 Irving Street, apart from it being 2 or 3 blocks from another installation, is I am protesting this in general, but in particular, I request that it be moved further east, 1/2 block down, so it would be around less residential buildings. There's basically 3 corners. The 3 corners, not the fourth corner, have, it's either just church, just a 1-story commercial building, and a 1-story commercial building with some office space above it, and I think also some residential. In any case, it's less. It's all of half a block further than where they proposed it, and I'm again asking that they move it further east to the corner of 5th and another light pole. Okay. It's been over 20 years since the government updated their guidelines for radiation exposure, and now we're up to 5G. There have been 0 long-term studies evaluating the safety exposure of 5G technology, and meanwhile, many independent studies, thousands in fact, reveal negative health effects of electromagnetic radiation exposure and offer no conclusive evidence that it is safe. There has been an appeal involving more than 240 scientists who have reviewed peer-reviewed research on radiation and object to this, and I'll move on from there. People who live within 350 meters of a cell antenna for more than 10 years have a 4-fold increase for cancer, and in women it's 10-fold. The studies that everything is based on is over 10 years old, and advances in our technology is translated in much more powerful antennas. The California Medical Association passed a wireless resolution in 2014 stating, whereas peer-reviewed research has demonstrated adverse biological effects. Thank you, that was the CMA supporting advocating for new safety exposure limits for wireless devices. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else for 425 Ivan Street? Okay. Is Mobilite here? Would you please come up?
Good morning. My name is David Nagel from Mobility LLC. This particular site we are deploying for Sprint's small cell network. We've looked at several locations in the area, and in regards to the protesters' response to move it further east, unfortunately that's taking it further away from the area we're trying to serve. These small cells generally serve a radius of a couple blocks at best. So we've had our RF engineers in conjunction with Sprint review the location, and of the available poles that are able to support a small cell facility, the one we've chosen is the best to achieve that goal. Planning reviewed this site in conjunction with Article 25, found that the design meets all city standards. The Department of Public Health reviewed our RF report prepared by Hammett and Edison and found it meets city and federal standards. So in that regard, we've complied with all Article 25 requirements and don't find that this protest has any merit. If you have any questions, particularly about the RF, a representative from Hammond and Edison is here who can answer questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
How many locations did you test out to see which was the most suitable location?
We looked at about a dozen in that area. Again, we're looking at a very limited radius. So while there is no legal requirement to do alternative site studies, of course, we're trying to find the best location. There's only certain availability of SFPUC metal poles, other poles at intersections or MTA poles. There might be upcoming city projects that affect our ability to attach to those. Utility poles often are overcrowded or have obstructions, trees, other overhead lines that are already there. So this particular SFPUC streetlight pole was the best location for this site.
Based on all the things that you cited, you looked at about a dozen locations, you said, and
Yeah.
it was a process of elimination?
And in conjunction with our RF engineers that, they run simulations to see what the effectiveness of that location will be versus others, and this was the best location.
So you looked at the location that the protester had also stated, and
I can't speak to exactly
Okay.
the one she's referring to, but going further east is going out of this particular, sort of radius we're trying to serve.
okay. No, it depends. If there's nobody else, then there's an opportunity for public comments. Because, no, the way we do that,
20 feet
understood, ma'am.
isolated.
We have to have a sum of order, otherwise we're going to go back and forth. So we'll do public comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So do we have anyone else that wants to speak on 425 Ivan Street? Okay. Do we have any public comments for that? 425 Ivan Street. This is an opportunity. It's public comments. If you have something else to add, it's public comments.
I think the gentleman's...
Ma'am, your name again?
Oh, I'm sorry, Kathy Cohn, Inner Sunset. I wanted to say that the reason I was proposing this other pole is it's about 20 feet, 25 feet from the one they've selected. It is the exact same kind of lighting pole that they're selecting because they're tall. There are no obstructions. There's no collection of wires related to Muni or anything like that. I think they just really don't want to change what they've already had partially approved because this is the simplest approach for them. And he couldn't have looked at 12 different sites because if they're so concerned about there being a limited distance that they can go, there would not have been 12 sites even to consider because there's many unsuitable poles. What I proposed is a suitable pole, and it's about 20 or 25 feet away, and it is not as close to where people are living, which is why I proposed it. And I thought that was a very reasonable proposal, which it seems like the mobile companies are very unwilling to make any variations for community requests. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments on 425 Ivan Street? So the next one is 19 WR-00123, and this is 310 Sacramento Street. Do we have any appellants on 30? Come up, sir. Three minutes.
Good morning. My name's Kurt Sweeney.
1 second. Go ahead, sir.
Kurt Sweeney, 3008A, Sacramento. And I'm just interested in getting some additional information about this installation. I was wondering how close to RF exposure limits will this device be in terms of the exposure to the person closest to the device, living probably in 3010. What are the safeguards in place that the transmitter, the device that's going to be installed, will operate within its approved power limits? Also, just like to know the comparison of the approved power output of the device that's being installed versus the maximum output capable of the device. And lastly, can the device be adjusted remotely in terms of its power output? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else for 310 Sacramento?
Hi, good morning. My name's Kevin Waldeck. I live at 3008 Sacramento, upstairs from Kurt. I've lived there for 11 years. This device is going to be installed directly outside our bedroom window and our dining room window. The reason for my protest is it will directly obstruct our view, a view that we appreciate each and every day. There's also another device on the next pole down that was just installed in 2017. I don't understand, why we need to have so many of these devices on so many poles that are so close together. I did submit pictures of the view obstruction. I don't know if that made it to you or not.
Yeah, I have it in the folder. Yes.
You do have them?
Yeah, I don't have it here with me.
I do have them here on my phone.
You can project it. Leo, can you help if you want to project that, please?
Yeah, I will. Let me find them. The view out my bedroom window, and it's a foggy day. Normally, you would see Sutro Tower right there, above that shorter building of the two. And this device is going to be directly in our view of Sutro Tower. This is a view out of. Oh, I'm sorry, that was our downstairs. That's our dining room view. And then this is our bedroom view in the same direction. There's been a lot of inconsistencies in the process for this application as well. There was work being done on this pole a good 8 months ago, so they were already doing work in advance of notifying the public. The notification process was significantly abbreviated, I would say. There was a 10-day gap between the time that the letter was dated and the time they mailed the letter to us, which gave our community only about 7 days to respond to this. But my biggest issue is the concentration of these devices. The fact that we have a device on the corner, 3000 Sacramento, that was just installed in early 2018. The hearings for that were in 2017. That's all.
So quickly, sir, I just wanted to get a clarification. So there was 10 days from the date of the letter, on the letter,
To the postmark on
to the postmark on the
Correct.
letter. Okay, thank you. Mobility? Before you come up, is there anyone else here for 3010 Sacramento? Okay, please, sir.
Hi, David Nagel again from Mobility LLC. In regard to this particular location, same as the previous one I spoke about, we evaluated a number of sites. We applied for this particular pole. We received, the tentative approvals in compliance with Article 25. Planning reviewed this site in regard to design standards. Public Health Department reviewed it again in compliance with FCC and local requirements. In regard to the first protesters' RF questions, if you have further questions you'd like answered about those, I'll have to defer to Raj from Hammond and Edison, who prepared the RF report and can speak to that better than I can. In regard to the second protesters' comments, notice, I believe, and I suppose Public Works can correct me if I'm wrong off the top of my head, but I believe there's 7 business days to mail out that notice, and then the respondents have, I believe, 20 days of the date on the letter or the postmark. So if the postmark is later, then they still had the full 20-day response period to respond. I believe that everyone who submitted written protests did so within that period, and there were even some protests into August. So from the date of the postmark to the time protests were submitted, everyone had the same opportunity as required under Article 25. As for the other location on the street, that belongs to a different carrier. It's not a Mobility or Sprint location, so we're all operating different equipment on different frequencies, and so there's, every carrier has a different need. We did look at another location at that intersection, but SFPUC would not allow us to use that pole per their policies at the time. So we chose the next best available one for our RF needs, which happened to be up the block a little further at the current location.
Okay. Just for my own clarification, how do you address protesters' concerns about whether there are safeguards in place? And, the first protester had some concerns, and what's your process for addressing those concerns?
Sure. So my colleague that permitted the site submitted a written response to these protests that stated that we've complied with all Article 25 requirements, and that the planning department reviewed the RF report. The RF report itself states specifically where we are in terms of the FCC maximum and things like that. I guess particularly in regard to his concern about some kind of remote power boosting on the radios or antennas, that's not something that we do. And again, any change in the way that equipment operates that would necessitate a new RF report for the city's consideration. So if anything were to change in the future, which as of now there's no plans to do so, we would go through the correct channels through the city to have that reviewed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Leo, do you have any clarification on the mailing? The concerns? Okay.
Yes. Just to clarify, we do give the notice tentative approval. We put a date on it to the applicant. They have to, at a photo sim, translate the document to 4 different languages. And then they send those out. We don't start the protest period on that date. We start the protest period once they did a proper public notification, so once they actually mailed the notices and they did the posting. Okay. And it's generally the latter of the 2 dates. So it coincides when they receive the letter, they have 20 days after that date to protest.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comments on 310 Sacramento Street? Public comments? Please come up, sir, if you have public comments. Public comments are limited to 2 minutes.
Kurt Sweeney, 3008 Sacramento. Just one more question in the technical realm. Given that there are now 2 devices in close proximity, has there been an evaluation of the cumulative impact of RF exposure from both devices, not just the new one that's proposed? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Any other public comments on 3010 Sacramento Street? On Sacramento Street, not general. It has to be on Sacramento Street. Thank you.
Again, I'm Kevin Waldeck. I live at 3008 Sacramento Street. The other thing I didn't mention earlier is this section of Sacramento Street is a section where I believe the neighborhood association intentionally has undergrounded all the utilities already. So we don't have overhead wires, and that might be why we're getting this concentration of antenna requests for these poles, because there aren't other wires obstructing with these poles. But you know, the fact that the neighborhood intentionally, years ago, paid money to underground all the utilities to make sure that the street stayed pretty and that the views stayed available, these concentration of these antennas is beginning to negatively impact that.
Thank you, sir. So in the absence of any other public comments on 310 Sacramento Street, we'll move on to the next permit number, which is 19WR-00121, and this is XNet System 2801 Broadway. Please come ahead, ma'am. Leo.
My name is Dorothy Kitt, and I have resided at 2801 Broadway for the past 46 years. And I've submitted a protest stating the issues of noise and radiation of 5G. However, I'd like to call your attention to the issue of preservation of historic districts, which is part of the planning department's rules, and allowing commercial interests like this one for Sprint to gain a foothold. We've opened our home for charitable events over the years, including my husband's alma mater, USF, where he was a regent for many years. This home is one of the oldest on the last 2 blocks of Broadway. It was built in 1902 by architect Willis Polk and has a gate built by our beloved local artist Ruth Ozawa. It's received an award from the California Heritage Council. It's also one of the homes on the cover of a book that I'm going to pass up for you to see that was published in 2016. To install something that detracts from the historic value of any of the public poles or sidewalks in these last 2 blocks of Broadway is not forward thinking and giving our beautiful city away for 30 pieces of silver. I believe it's the duty of our citizens of our city to stand behind our city leaders so we will be able to withstand the pressures being imposed upon them by commercial interests. And it's time to say no. We won't allow our residential areas to be encroached upon. And no, we will not have commercial boxes and antennas to face our historic residential neighborhoods. And no, we will not allow our city to be pressured by outside commercial interests that will detract from our world-class reputation. I'm showing a picture of a proposed an installation that's being done as we speak. Friday they did it, and it's right around the corner. And it has a huge base, and they haven't put the stuff up in the air. Also, here's an article. We're not the only ones at issue with this. The Wall Street Journal this weekend has an article saying, cities want 5G, but not like this. U.S. municipalities, citing aesthetics and specious health concerns, are wrestling with the FCC and telecoms over the new wireless technology. Marin County, California, has passed ordinances and resolutions that limit 5G cells in residential areas. Towns like Mill Valley specify zones where towers aren't permitted. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Here's an article from the Wall Street Journal that just came out this weekend, and I'll get that book for you. It's in my purse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else for 2801 Broadway? This is protesters for 2801 Broadway.
Calling members of the public or the applicant right now?
Those that have protested 2801 Broadway, those are the people that are calling. Then I'll call XNet and then public comments.
And it's right outside my bedroom window, by the way.
So do we have any other protesters for 2801 Broadway? Okay. Is someone from XNet here?
Yes.
Please come up.
Hi, good morning. Rick Hirsch on behalf of Extenet Systems. As far as the location, design, and compatibility of our proposal with the neighborhood, Extenet has worked very closely with the planning department for several years to evolve and carefully design these very small installations to blend into the existing background infrastructure. They're as unobtrusive as we can possibly make them at this point with the technology that we have available and the designs that we have available. The planning department did review the proposal. They determined that the facility in this location would be consistent with the public health, safety, convenience, and general welfare, and would not unreasonably affect, intrude upon, or diminish any identified city resource. In the planning department's determination dated June 19th, planning specifically determined that the proposed facility would not significantly detract from the character of the adjacent residential, commercial, mixed-use districts, any scenic vista or potential and/or known historic building or district. We believe the proposal has been appropriately designed, scaled, and located on an existing utility infrastructure to minimize visual impact. And I do want to state that the proposed facility and the pole are 47 linear feet away from the subject building that the protester speaks about, 47 linear feet. And I'd like to show the photo simulation. Let's see. And let's see, zoom in. Can we zoom in? Thanks. Let's see if we can.
Just, I think if you push it up.
So this is the photo simulation showing our proposed facility on the right there, and on the left is the existing pole. And that's a distance of 47 linear feet between the pole and the building. If you have any additional questions or comments, I'd be willing and able to address them at this time, but thank you for your consideration. I'm available for any questions.
So quick question. You stated that the planning department also put into consideration the historic features of the neighborhood before.
They absolutely do. The planning is very fastidious and very strict about their evaluations of these poles. We've been in numerous occasions, we've had polls declined by planning for approval. They've rejected many of our proposals and suggestions. In this particular case, they did a very careful and thorough evaluation and determined that it was compatible.
Okay, thank you.
And it is 47 feet between the pole and the building. Thank you.
Do we have any public comments on 2801 Broadway? Public comments? Kim?
I'd just like to add one thing. That last window on the
Your
second
name?
floor is, Dorothy
Thank you.
Kitt, 2801 Broadway. That's my bedroom window. I'm going to have 5G right outside the bedroom window, and I don't think that's right. But I don't think it's right in that neighborhood or any residential neighborhood to block people's views or expose them to any kind of radiation. I think the city fathers really have to, think twice before they allow that kind of thing in the residential area. That's just my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any other public comments?
I'm sorry, since she raised a new point, may I please respond?
Please.
I'm sorry, Rick Hirsch again for Extenet Systems. The protester raised an additional point that I'd like to respond to, which is radio frequency or electromagnetic frequency emissions. So the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, actually sets the safety standards for these types of facilities and requires providers like Extenet to demonstrate compliance with their very strict standards. This proposed installation has been reviewed by Hammett & Edison, which is an independent third-party engineering firm. They confirmed that the proposal meets all FCC standards. In fact, the analysis indicates that the installation would result in exposure levels, EMF exposure levels, well below their most restrictive standards. And in particular, a person standing at ground level at the actual facility, at the ground underneath it, their maximum exposure level would be 0.91% of the exposure limit, 0.91%. That's less than 1%. And also the maximum electromagnetic frequency exposure level at any nearby building, including this adjacent building at 2801 Broadway, would be 2.3% of the maximum, 2.3%. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments? Public. It's public comments. You can't respond to him, but if you have public comments, I can't stop you from making public comments. 2 minutes.
Kathy Cohn. The EPA has written a letter to the FCC stating that the current regulations don't adequately protect us from low-level exposure. So this is a tool that the mobile technology companies have been using. They're talking about how everything is stated as meeting standards. As I mentioned when I spoke earlier, the standards have not been updated for decades. We're not talking about 2G, we're talking about 5G. And if the EPA, whose job is more dialed into health matters rather than communication regulations, which is the FCC's scope, if they're concerned and instructing the FCC to that we're not being adequately protected by the standards that they're referring to every time there are these hearings, then we're basing this information and these approvals on fraudulent information, or at least incomplete or misrepresented, maybe that's a better way to state it, information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? So in the absence of all public comments, this hearing is now closed. And just Leo stated the reason, there are 5 guidelines by which these applications are reviewed and approved, and Public Works had put into consideration all those 5 criteria before it came here. So my recommendations to the director is also based on those 5 criteria. I understand the concerns that have been raised, but there are legal issues, there are policies, and there are things that that are within those constraints. We can't recommend based on anything outside what the city allows. So just making that disclaimer, but I do collect information and I do make recommendations to the director. You had public comments? Because that was called, I did call that when we were on that. No, I did. Oh, I did not? I missed that. I apologize. There was no one here for that.
Excuse me, if
She wasn't for.
Okay.
She wasn't for 27.
that's all right. There weren't any protesters.
There weren't. Okay, that's why
So
didn't
I
call you.
wasn't going to speak to this, but I did want an opportunity to respond, if I could, at your indulgence. We've heard a lot of requests for information today about radio frequency emissions and anxieties about 5G. We have Raj Mathur here from Hammett and Edison, who is one of the experts in emissions. And if it's okay with you, I'd like for him to come up and answer some of the questions that have been raised on the other sites.
I think that would be great.
Okay,
Because it
thanks.
helps. Thank you. Thank you. So I apologize for not calling. There wasn't any protesters. That's probably why I missed you.
Good morning. My name is Raj Mathur. I'm with Hammett and Edison. We're an independent consulting engineering firm located in Sonoma, and I'm a licensed professional electrical engineer in the state of California. Our job as engineers is to evaluate sites like these for radio frequency exposure or RF exposure compliance with the FCC standard. And we've completed that evaluation for actually all the sites that you heard today, and they all comply with the FCC limits. There's three reasons why they comply with the FCC limits. The first is that these are extremely low power facilities. They're anywhere from 10 to 100 times below the power of what you find in these larger macro sites. Macro sites are the ones that you see on building rooftops or taller poles with 6, 9 antennas. So these are much lower power than those. The second reason is that the energy from the antennas falls with the square of the distance. So what that means is that when you get twice as far away from the antenna, the energy falls by the square of 2 or 4 times. And when you go 10 times as far away from the antenna, the energy falls by the square of 10 or 100 times. So there's an exponential drop in radio frequency energy with distance. And the third reason is that the energy the antennas emit is not equal in all directions. The energy is in a narrow beam going out towards the horizon. And so the RF exposure levels at ground and at lower nearby buildings are significantly lower than the FCC limits. And then discussing the limits themselves, there were some questions on that. The FCC limits are from 1996, so 23 years old now. But just a couple of weeks ago, the FCC came out with a document reaffirming that their limits are still appropriate and still valid. In addition, there are limits from other countries like Canada, UK, France, Australia, New Zealand. Virtually every developed country in the world has RF exposure standards, and they're all extremely similar to the FCC standard. And these sites would all meet those limits as well. In addition, there are 2 other limits that are not associated with countries. One is the IEEE limit, Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers. That's the largest professional electrical and electronic organization in the world. They have a standard-setting body. They set their limits. Those limits are also extremely similar to the FCC standard, and their limits will be reaffirmed later this year. And the last one is the European Union standard, that's called ICNIRP, International Council for Radiation Protection, and their limits are also extremely similar to the FCC limits. So I'll stop there, but if you've got any questions in general or anything specific regarding radio frequency exposure for these sites, I'll be happy to answer the questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, are there any other public comments? Public comments? Ma'am, you can't, sir, you can't direct your questions to him. Just state your name.
My name's Kevin Waldeck, 3008 Sacramento. I'd be curious if the prior speaker is being paid to be here, and if so, if he's registered as a lobbyist in the city and county.
Thank you. Any other public comments? So in the absence of any comments, this hearing is now closed. Thank you for your time.